Okay, Alina says yes. So, mm, we'll straight away start from where we had stopped in the previous class. I hope you all remember. Okay, we were on this slide in the previous class, and we were discussing as to uh, how tragedy sort of represents people better than we are, and comedy represents people worse than we are. So that is the point we were. So if we have to recollect what we had done in the previous class, I was talking of every art. Every representation of every art differs in three different ways, and I had spoken to you of the first one was media. Second one I was talking was of object. Okay, and I told you in object the first thing is characters. So in every art form characters are represented, and those characters can either be better than us, or they can be worse than us, or just like we are. So there are three different categories of characters: who are better than us, worse than us, or who can also be just as we are. In the second part of objects, I was telling you all how comedy represents people worse than we are, and tragedy, while tragedy represents people better than we are. And I think I started off speaking about how tragedy represents people better than we are, and I was just trying to explain that, and we had left our class there. Before I could begin, continue from where I had stopped in the previous class, there are two things that I would want to clarify. One is your assignment, that quiz that I have put up on the portal will be open till this Saturday only. Okay, by this Saturday, all of you should answer. Some of you have already answered, and some of you have done very poorly. Some of you have done well, but that will be open till this Saturday, and after that I will close it. And that's the first thing. Second thing, if in case I get logged out, don't panic. I'll come back. If I get logged out in the first 40 minutes, then I'll come back. If in case I get logged out after first 40 minutes, when the last 5 minutes are remaining, if in case I get logged out, don't worry, you can quit the meeting and go. So don't panic. If in case I get logged out before that, I'll come back and join the meeting. Okay, so let me just continue. So tragedy represents people better than we are, and how does that happen? Many of you had given your own thoughts about how actually tragedy represents people better than we are. And some of you sort of were countering and saying, no, tragedy does not represent people better than we are, but it's comedy which represents people better than we are, because you have people who look very jovial, who look very light-hearted, and that kind of people you have in comedy. Now, let me put my points forth in understanding how tragedy represents people better than we are, and vice versa. This point is understood with the background of the definition of tragedy that's given by Aristotle. Uh, Taking this statement apart from the background of the definition that's given by Aristotle, it wouldn't be fair to discuss. Now, the definition of tragedy, according to Aristotle, you'll be coming to see in the next presentation, and that would be the first slide that you'll be looking at. And so, what does Aristotle go about defining tragedy? How does he go about defining tragedy? One of the important criteria for him in tragedy is that the hero, or the main character, protagonist of a play, should always be of a high stature. He cannot be an ordinary person, just as we are, like the among the characters, just as we are. No, protagonist cannot be of that nature. He cannot be just like any other ordinary person. So somebody had asked a question in the previous class: how does the protagonist of the play Lithuania then become a tragic hero? And I was trying to explain to you all how he becomes a tragic hero from the point of view of, you can also call that as not exactly a tragedy in the strict sense of the word, but can be a modern tragedy. And how is that? Because he also has a sort of has that mobility from poverty, which his family is still negotiating with, and he has become rich. He has a lot of money, so he has a gold watch. One point. The second thing is, He is not still located and restricted to the small place like a village or something that's very much isolated from the urban. He is somebody who resides in an urban city, so has a lot of exposure. His outlook towards life is so different because he tells his sister, what are you doing here, because life is so boring here. You don't have pubs, you don't have bars and all this kind of stuff here to enjoy. So the whole idea of enjoyment is different for him. So this features, then I told you there is a tragic flaw in every, there has to be a tragic flaw in every protagonist. Whether you take Othello, you take Hamlet, you take Macbeth, any of this protagonists, when you talk of them, necessarily there has to be a tragic flaw, or Oedipus also. These all characters should have tragic flaw. Now what does this tragic flaw do? This tragic flaw is something that the audience will know, but the protagonist himself would not know. And therefore I told you, what happens is the audience begins to feel sorry, sad for the protagonist, and you don't get angry with him, because you would get angry if he had knowingly done something wrong. If Othello would kill his wife Desdemona, knowing that she was still faithful to him, and if he had killed her, then we would feel angry, or we would get angry with Othello. But we don't get angry, we feel sad for him, we feel pity for him, we feel sorry for him. And there's a word that uh, Aristotle gives us, provides us with, to sum up those emotions of sadness, grief, pity, sympathy, or empathy, whatever you call that. All these words he puts or encapsulates all these words into a one small term, and that could be the aim of tragedy. So that's how, looking at a tragedy from the point of view of ancient Greece, you understand tragedy represents people better than we are, because they always belong to the higher class, to the elite class. Okay, that's the first point. Now how does comedy represent people worse than we are? Usually you would have this kind of clowns in every play, one or two clowns in every play. Now these clowns would always be ordinary people, ordinary in the sense of, when you go back to characters, we have third category of people such as we are, and these clowns would belong to that category of people who always involve themselves in doing silly actions or silly acts. No doubt they entertain people, no doubt they made people laugh, they made people sort of realize their lives had to be taken a little more easily. All that things they did, but they did not belong to that upper class or elite class. That was one. Not many of the aristocratic people who belong to aristocratic class or that upper class would be able to sort of relate themselves with the clowns, would not want to relate themselves with the clown. But in spite of Othello, Macbeth, Oedipus, Hamlet, in spite of them committing a crime, would people want to still be like them? They definitely would want to. What would they want? What would they not want to inherit? That one tragic flaw from that particular protagonist. But otherwise, rest all characters, attributes of that particular person, we would want to inherit, or we would be happy to inherit or acquire, at least possess them, except for that tragic flaw. But rest all we would want to have. But whereas when we come to clown, we would not want to have any of those features. We would not want to behave very silly people, where people would laugh at us and all that kind of things that would actually happen. So that's how tragedy represents people worse than we are. Sorry, comedy represents people worse than we are. Now, unfortunately, I told you the book Poetics is said to be only the first part, and the second part, which actually dealt with what Aristotle thought about comedy, is lost. I told you most of his works were burnt, and it seems, or it is assumed, that half part of Poetics was also burned, which actually contained Aristotle's thoughts on comedy. So therefore we do not have elaborate discussions of comedy, we don't have his thoughts on comedy, Aristotle's thoughts, elaborate thoughts on comedy, but we have a lot of information with regard to tragedy. So these are the 2 points we had left out in objects. So first one was the media, second one is the objects, and we'll go to the final one. So final one is the manners. Final one is the manners. Now what exactly is this manners? Okay, it's simple. It's types of narration. Okay, types of narration, and you can basically have three types of narrations. Okay, I'll come to the contemporary times, but this is what Aristotle says. You can basically have three types of narrations. What are these three types of narrations? I'm sure all of us are familiar with this. In simple, if I have to tell you, before reading all that I have put down there in the slide, it's first person narration. Okay, he has his own terms to define that first person narration. Sorry, to begin with, third person narration. You have third person narration, and then you have first person narration. These are two types of narration. And the final one is you have somebody like an omniscient narrator. Okay, who omniscient narrator. I'll tell you what exactly is meant by an omniscient narrator. Okay, let's come to the first one. Types of narration. Manner means types of narration. That is, in the third person you have becoming another person, and I have put there third person. So what happens in the third person narrative? You actually become part of the whole action, and you sort of you are also part of the whole plot that is taking place, or the action that is happening, and you meanwhile see the actions of others and go on narrating. Okay, but you are sort of an outsider who is sort of narrating. Okay, third person narrative. Or you have two three people, and one among them begins to narrate from the viewpoint of somebody else. From the, not you are not sharing your own viewpoints, but you are sharing the viewpoints of somebody else who is also involved probably in the action. Okay, that's third person narration, third person narrative. uh, okay, so that's the third person becoming another person. So you what happens, you don't uh, get fixed or attached to your own personality, but you put on the personality of somebody else, and from the perspective of that person you go on narrating a story, or go on narrating whatever. It could also be play. That's third person narration. Now, as against third person narration, where you have you putting on somebody else's personality and narrating, remaining same person and not changing, that is, you remain as you are, your personality is the same, and you do not change it, and you go on narrating. So what happens in the second kind is you go on narrating a story as though you are also an integral part of the whole story, and you don't narrate the story from the perspective of another person, but from your own perspective. Okay, from your own perspective. So this is remaining a same person and not changing. In simple, it is first person narration. You would be basically using I. Okay, you would be using all I's. In the third person narration, you would be using terms like he, she, or it for inanimate objects. Okay, he, she, it for inanimate. They also could be used. But in the second, you would be using basically I, because you are the one narrating. You are not putting on anybody's personality. It's you, and you are narrating the story from your viewpoint. Now the final one, how does that differ from the other two? Because I have put there third person omniscient narrator, by representing everyone as in action and activity. Okay, by representing everyone as in action and activity, that is third person omniscient narrator. Now let me explain that to you all. You probably, if you have read something, then you would understand that better. Now what happens with third person narrator, third person it's not omnipotent. Okay, it's omniscient narrator. It's a error there in the slide. It's omniscient narrator, third person omniscient narrator. Why omniscient? Because this narrator is not part of the action, is not part of the action. but he has access to the whole action that is happening, in the sense he is sort of able to see everything. He is able to see the actions of all characters, and that too he remains, I think, uh, lost connection. You all are not able to see the slide. Are you all able to see the slide? Are you all able to see the slide? Okay, yes, I thought so. 1 second, I'll just get back. I think I lost the connection. Okay, anyways, let me explain to you all that. The third part, meanwhile, I'll get connected. Uh, the third part is where you have the narrator sort of uh, present everywhere, he's present everywhere. So therefore, what happens, it's a single voice keeps talking, it's a single voice talking all through, who has the knowledge of the intricacies of the plot, and also gets into the mind of every character. So he knows what we are thinking, what every character is thinking. He has the knowledge, and so he goes about narrating everybody's feelings, he goes about narrating everybody's emotions, and he goes on talking. Is he part of it? No. If I had to give you example, it would be taken from the football field, where this omnipresent, omniscient narrator is something, somebody like a referee in a football match, who is part of the game, but he stands apart and looks at everybody. Okay, looks at everybody. He looks at everybody. He's he can see and sort of comment on the actions of every player. That's the first part. If you move on to the third person narrative that I told, becoming somebody else, you are part of the players team, you're part of the you are part of the team that is playing, but you are also playing the game, meanwhile also you are giving commentary. Okay, that is third person narration. Third person narration, you are playing the game, meanwhile you are also looking, he is doing that, he is doing that, so you are also giving commentary. The second, that is remaining the same person, that's first person narration. You are playing and you are narrating your own story from the way you are looking at the game. And I told you third person narrative, omniscient narrator is somebody like a referee who is outside the game, is looking at the whole field, and is sort of able to speak about it. So maybe the characters are not able to listen to what he is saying, but everybody else is able to listen to what he's saying. He's yeah, and not just that, he's also able to get into the minds of the player, because because he knows everything, and that's why I said he's omniscient. Okay, he understands everything, he knows everything. So these are the three types of narrations that you have. Okay, if anybody has anything to ask, because we finish that particular slide with that with this. I just had one more slide to just sum up what we had seen. Uh, if nobody has anything to ask, then we will straight away go to the next presentation. Okay, nobody has. Anybody has anything to ask? Hope all of you are listening. Okay, Ashwati says nothing. Uh, do commentators play the role of omniscient narrator? No, that was Samuel. That was Peter. That was just an example to you all, to make you understand how does an omniscient narrator works. So omniscient narrator, I don't know. There is one two examples I can give you. One I went through. We had the text. It's The title is Scarlet Letter. Okay, the title is Scarlet Letter. We had this novel, Scarlet Letter. There's this now who is a narrator. There are two characters. There are other very minor characters, but there are two basic very important characters. One is Hester Prynne, who is uh, who is who is supposed to have been uh, uh, unfaithful or committed adultery, whatever. And other one is Dimmesdale. Dimmesdale is supposed to be a priest who is alleged to have relationship with Hester Prynne. Now in this novel, Scarlet Letter, neither Hester Prynne nor Dimmesdale has any dialogues to talk. Everything is narrated by this omniscient narrator who is sort of having this overview of what's happening in the life of Hester Prynne and Dimmesdale. So he's hovering around on the top of their lives all the time. So what Hester Prynne thinks also is known to the omniscient narrator. What Dimmesdale is thinking is also known to the narrator. So everybody is sort of everything is known to this omniscient narrator. It's not the case with the third person narrator. Okay, third person narrator, that's not the case. That was only an example to give you all how a commentator. Okay, you asked me commentator. Commentator probably would more or less be like the third person narrator, not third person omniscient narrator, third person narrator, third person narrator. Okay, Ashwati has something. So omniscient or omnipotent, in the slide it's given omnipotent. I corrected that. In the slide it is omnipotent. That's wrong. It's omniscient. Okay, it's omniscient, not omnipotent. Okay. Yeah, it was a mistake on the slide. Yes, Ananya. It's a mistake on the slide. It's not omnipotent. It's not all powerful. It's all knowing. Okay, it's all knowing. It's all knowing, and therefore you are able to comment on everything. You're able to. I told you, the omniscient narrator is able to get into the minds of the psyche of the characters. Therefore, he can tell. That's one example I give you of Scarlet Letter, Hester Prynne and Dimmesdale. There's another. I don't know if the Hindi students would have this. There is something called a character called Manu. Okay, and I remember faintly from what I was studying when I was a student. Hopefully, they don't have the same text now. But there is this character Manu who is sort of sitting. You have the whole world being destroyed, and this character Manu is going on narrating stories. Okay, he is talking of how everybody is suffering and all that sort of. Now, what is he doing? And it's literally he is standing onto a platform because the whole world is destroyed because of floods, and he is standing onto a raised platform. That's how a omniscient narrator is. He is always above the characters, the normal characters. He's standing on top and sort of having that overview of what's happening to people, and then passing on his comments. And those comments are not meant for the characters of the play or the story. Those comments are meant for the readers. So readers understand what is going on, but not the characters themselves. Okay, if nobody has anything. Okay, there is one slide. So this is what we saw in the slide. We simply saw that all representations differ in three different ways. This is all that you will have to remember from this. All representations, all art forms. If representations is if that's a difficult word, it's not a difficult word, but if you are wondering what is this representation, then it is all art forms, all art. That's I told you, writing, drawing, painting, dancing, singing, name it, carpentry and pottery, whatever. They all differ in three different ways. The first one I told you, it's media. And what's exactly this media? It's the tools that are used. So the tools that are used by a painter are different compared to a carpenter, and the tools that are used by a potter are different from the ones that are used by a poet. All this. So tools are different. Secondly are the objects. And in objects, what you will have to remember, there are two things. Characters. First one, what is the object of representation? It's the characters which are represented always. And characters can be of three different categories. They can be extremely good characters, they can be extremely bad characters, or there can be ordinary characters. Better than we are, worse than we are, or just as we are. So three different kinds of characters. So these are, that's the second one. And the third one is the manners. And what is this manners? These are narrative styles. I told you there are three different narrative styles. In simple words, if I have to put: third person narrative, first person narrative, third person omniscient narrative. Okay. First person narrative, sorry, third person narrative, you become somebody else and begin to narrate. First person narrative, you remain to be what you are and then begin to narrate. And omniscient narrator, you remain apart from the action as though you know everything and you begin to narrate. With that, we close that particular presentation. I'll just move on to another one. If in case anybody has any doubt, you can still ask, or I can go to the next one. We still have about 20 minutes. Okay. I hope nobody has any questions. I will just, oh, this is wrong. I'll just display the definition of of uh, tragedy, and then probably I'll ask you to just have a look at that and then see how you can sort of dissect that, because that's the whole purpose that I'm going to see today. Okay. I think this screen is not yet visible to you all. Okay, now I think it is visible. Okay. See, there are again, there are just two things that we are going to see in this whole presentation. Okay, let's very systematically remember what we studied in the last presentation. There are only three things that we saw: media, object, and manners. And there are only just two things that we'll be looking at in this particular presentation. What are those? One, very important, is the definition of tragedy. Okay, we are going to look at the definition of tragedy and then dissection of the definition. That's the place where we get the whole idea of tragedy of Aristotle, or his thoughts are all sort of found in that one definition. So that's what we are going to do. And in the process of dissecting the whole definition of tragedy, we will come across many other things, and those will be the sub points in the first point there. And what is the second thing that we'll be looking at? We'll be looking at three unities that Aristotle talks of, which he thinks were extremely important. Okay. Okay, so these are the two things. Now let me make the presentation of that definition of tragedy according to Aristotle. Please read through. It will take around a minute for you all to read. After you have read, the definition, what are those outstanding points you find? Please put them up in the chat box, or you can also unmute yourself and tell me. Read the definition, and what are those things that strike you? You can tell me, and you will have to explain those. Why? What would be the significance of a particular phrase that you would pick? Because every word in this definition is associated with tragedy, and most of it I have also spoken of. Okay, it would be a little repetition of what I have already spoken of. Let's read through. If anybody is finished reading and if you have found something interesting, you may start sort of either talking about it or also putting it up on the chat box. We have Disha responding saying catharsis. Anyways, we'll come back to discuss that and what Disha understands by that. The others, I hope you would quickly respond because we do not have much time. We just have about uh, 10-12 minutes. Oh, okay, I will start off with Disha. Could you just explain, Disha, what do you mean by, or why did you sort of choose that word, catharsis? What do you understand by that? Tragedy represents a whole lot of emotions. Okay. So does that mean, Disha, that comedy does not represent emotions? No. Okay. All right. So you feel comedy does not represent any emotions, but it's a tragedy which represents whole lot of emotions. Okay. Right.
So, not in that manner.
Okay.
I feel in that tragedy, the level of representation is a bit higher.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
Um,
Whereas whereas comedy it is sort of mediocre.
yeah, I
Okay. No.
felt that.
Okay, Disha. You were saying something?
No, no, no.
Okay, fine,
That's
fine. Good, good. I understand because the minute we think of tragedy, we think of blood and bloodshed and
yeah,
something
and
that's serious, right? And the
yeah,
minute
yeah,
we
yeah.
think
That's
of
what.
comedy, we think of something very light.
Yeah,
That's the whole understanding. Yeah, that's the whole understanding of, and that's something because we have been so much used to watching kind of bloodshed and then we say, oh, it's a tragedy because we see that something on a screen. We have been used
screen.
to seeing something on screen, and comedy is what something that makes us all the time laugh. So that's from that understanding, what you're saying is I absolutely agree. From that point of view, I agree. But let's anyways look at what Aristotle thinks of it. Okay, Disha, thank you for that. Anybody else who can respond to something because there's so many things. Okay, because let me just give you a clue to some of you. If you see, as Disha said just now, it's a representation of serious complete. I'll speak to you on that complete. I'll change the word however, but complete action, what exactly does it mean to have a complete action and what's incomplete action then? Or if somebody can make an attempt to explain me what is complete action, and and let's see if anybody can do that, it would be great. A complete action which has magnitude, again magnitude should be there. If it doesn't have, then again it, for Aristotle at least, that cannot be called. The second aspect is embellished speech. You cannot be again writing in ordinary language, which with each of its elements separately again. So there are elements which are separately, which are stitched together to bring about a tragedy. So I would be talking of that elements which include or which go on to make a tragedy all together in one whole presentation. I'm not going to take up that today, but that would be one whole presentation. That much is there to speak about that. In the parts of the play represented by people acting, okay, and not by narration. It's only acting and not narration. Accomplishing, fulfilling by pity and terror the catharsis of such emotions. Okay. Okay, complete action, an action that has a source and eventually gets resolved. A good attempt, Disha. Complete action is, or I can just change that word from complete action to whole action. If but good attempt, an action that has a source and eventually gets resolved. If you could explain that, I think would be nice. Because I think it needs a little explanation. Disha, if you could make an attempt of explaining that. Disha, she's not coming. I don't know. Okay, somebody else want to make an attempt of explaining complete whole action, or anything from this from the whole definition that you would want to pick up and speak. Okay, we are running short of time, 37. So we have about 8 minutes, and I will have to finish that in it. Okay, so let me come dissecting the whole definition. Okay, dissecting the whole definition, and to begin with, I'll pick up only this, the whole action, which Disha made an attempt to answer. So that first phrase that I'm going to pick up is where it is said, tragedy is a representation of a serious, no doubt, serious, complete action, and I'm changing that phrase of complete action to whole action. That's the first phrase that will be taking up, whole action. And second one is with magnitude. I told you, with magnitude. So let's look at what is exactly this whole. Okay, what is exactly he means by this whole. It's a definition given by Aristotle himself in his book Poetics. Okay, it's not something that I got from internet or it came that way to me. uh, it's something that he himself has defined what he means by this whole action. Now he would go on to define whole as something which has beginning, which has a middle, and which also has an end. Okay, which whole is something that has a beginning, which has a middle, and has an end. I think this is a very typical definition that we had studied in our primary school or primary classes when our teachers taught us an essay or writing, how when teachers taught us how to write essays. They said you should have an introduction, then you have the body, and then finally you should have the conclusion. So if you are going to replace those words with beginning, middle, and end, you can say beginning is as good as an introduction, middle is as good as a body, and an end is as good as a conclusion. So but these are the terms that he uses. He says a whole action is one which has the beginning, which has a middle, and has the end. Now he also goes on to define what exactly is this beginning, and what exactly is this middle, and what exactly is this conclusion. So they are very specific to him. So he says beginning is, please pay attention to the words that are there. These are words taken straight away from the book. Does not of necessity follow something else, but after which naturally is or comes into being. That meaning is, or if I have to simplify that statement, the beginning necessarily does not follow from anything. Okay, beginning necessarily does not follow from anything, but of necessity should have something after it. The beginning will not follow from necessity from something else, but necessarily should have something after it for sure. It should have something after it. If there is nothing after beginning, then that cannot be the beginning. Or if there is something before beginning, then again that cannot be the beginning. Okay, so of necessity, it follows from nothing, but necessarily it should have something after it. Hope that one thing is clear. That is the beginning. Okay, that's the beginning. Now, what is the middle? Follows of necessity and naturally has something after it. Now, the middle, it necessarily or logically flows from the beginning. It is necessary, and of necessity, middle should have something after it. It should have something. So middle is something, has something before it and also after it. But beginning will have nothing before it but should have something after it. So that's the beginning and that's the middle. Middle should have something, necessarily have something before it, and should necessarily have also something after it. That's the. Now what happens if one of those things are sort of missing? Like example, for example, something is not there in the beginning, and you say this is the middle. That ceases to be middle, because of definition it should have something before it. It should logically follow from the beginning. It should logically follow from the beginning and logically flow into the end. It should logically, the middle should logically follow from the beginning and flow into the end. Only then it continues to remain as middle. Otherwise, if any of those things are missing, it ceases to be the middle. And naturally, what would be the conclusion? It would be the opposite of beginning. So beginning is where you necessarily do not have a text following from something else, but you should have something after it for sure. Conclusion would be you would have logical flow of text from the middle to the end, but you should not have anything after it. I am sure it has confused you all a lot, but you will have to think about it, and I'm sure it is simple concept, but probably you'll have to think about it for a while. Conclusion is you will have something naturally following from the middle, but you should not have anything after it. Necessarily you should not have anything. Now what happens if you have a text after the conclusion? You say, like sometimes it happens, now I am going to conclude. When you hear speeches, people say, now I am going to conclude, and we become suddenly excited and happy that okay, the person is going to conclude. But that conclusion does not become the conclusion of that person, because if that happens to be the conclusion, then there should be nothing after the conclusion. So this is the conclusion that I'm saying, and that should be the end of it. If you say my conclusion has some more text which is flowing, which is not part of the conclusion, then the conclusion ceases to be conclusion, and probably the next text which is flowing, still flowing, that probably take over as the conclusion. Okay, let me explain that once again. Whole action meaning which has the beginning, which has the middle, and which has the end. Okay, now what is the beginning? Beginning is something that does not have anything before it, but necessarily will have something after it. And what does it have after it? It will have a logical flow of middle. Okay, logical flow of middle. Does it have anything before beginning? There is nothing, and that's why it is the beginning. It does not have anything before it, but it definitely has something after it. Now this definition you will have to remember of the beginning, middle, and the end, conclusion or the end, because that goes on to sort of make dramatic changes in the way he describes an artist, Aristotle. Okay, because this is the core difference between Aristotle and Plato. Because for Plato, art is not the beginning, but whereas for him it's the beginning. Okay, anyways, we'll come to comparative studies of Aristotle and Plato much later, but for us this is important to understand that beginning has nothing before it, but definitely has something after it. Middle, it has It necessarily has something before it and also will have something after it. Conclusion is a logical flow of the middle, but should not have anything after it. Okay, and any of those sort of a little disturbances around would break the whole idea of beginning, middle, and the end. Okay, so I think exactly it is 10:46. If you have any doubts, you can ask. Otherwise, I will stop because you will have to go to your next class. Okay, 72. Anybody has anything to ask? If you can, if you have anything to ask, please ask. If you don't have anything, you can we can just go. Okay, no doubts. Thank you. All right. So you may leave the meeting.